Good day, everyone. A warm welcome to each and one of you in the room. We're just giving a few more seconds for everyone to join, and then we'll start. Good. I think just to be cognizant of the time and not to let everyone wait, I think we're ready to start. So a very warm welcome again. We are very excited to share this webinar with each and every one of you. And again, want to thank our scientific advisor, David Swanepoel, for making time in his busy schedule to present this topic for us all. But before we go into the webinar, I would just like to do a brief introduction to our company, hearX Group, for those that are not familiar with us. So we are a proudly ISO 13485 medical device certified company that focus on doing innovative solutions to improve access to hearing healthcare. So we always strive to pivot and make sure that our solutions are fit for the market and make sure that we innovate in how we provide these access to the hearing healthcare. And I think today is again one of those opportunities that we want to showcase what we have achieved and done to make our solutions very fit for the current market situation. And I think it's time to hand over to you, David.
Great. Thank you, Riani. Yes, I'm David Swanepoel, and I am a professor of audiology at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And I also have some adjunct positions in Australia. And then, as Riani mentioned, I wear this hat as a co-founder and a scientific advisor to the hearX Group as well. So welcome to everyone. I know people have logged in from all over the world. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening for wherever you are. It's good to have you on board with this webinar. A very timely topic. We're looking at audiology during the COVID-19 crisis, but also taking a look at what it may look like beyond COVID-19. So let me just share with you a little bit about how I'd like to take us through this webinar today. So firstly, I'd like us to kind of just sketch a little bit of context around COVID-19 and the telehealth trends in audiology that relate to this pandemic. We'll look at things like the audiology patient profile and COVID-19, the pressure that this is creating on audiology practices now, but also what it may look like in the future. And then we'll talk about the need for low and no touch audiology alternatives in this current crisis. And then for the second half of the webinar, I'd like us to look at the digital solutions that can enable alternative audiology care. And in specific, we'll take a look at the self-test kit that's been developed by the hearX Group as a stopgap to really provide a applied solution during this interesting and difficult, challenging time. So COVID-19 and telehealth trends in audiology. If we just consider COVID-19 and the place where it hits hardest, you know, the typical audiology patients that we see are adults, elderly adults, and they are at the highest risk of mortality and morbidity due to COVID-19. Here are some recent updated statistics that look at, on your left-hand side, the mortality rate, the percentage of people deceased according to age, and we're looking at the Italy and the UK data only here. You can see the Italy data on the left, lighter bars, and the darker bars are for the UK. And what you can clearly see here is that the vast majority of deceased patients are above 60 years of age, peaking at around between 80 and 89. So that's clear that age is a significant risk factor for mortality with COVID-19, but that's also the exact group of patients that audiologists typically serve. The vast majority of patients with hearing loss are the elderly or adults. So there's certainly an increased risk there. And interestingly as well, it also seems that like there's a biological sex risk factor. So men are more likely to have mortality due to COVID-19, with this data showing 63% of the deaths are actually male compared to 37% in women. So these two risk factors certainly count against the services of audiologists during this time where infection rates are a risk. There's also obviously the added component that if someone has multiple conditions or it certainly increases the risk. Anything from a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, or atrial fibrillation, that increases the risk for death. And of course, we know that the elderly are the ones who suffer most from these additional conditions that increase the risk. So if we think about our audiological services, safety is now first and foremost. And that's also true for telehealth in audiology. The interesting thing is with telehealth in audiology is that previously it was more about convenience, about accessibility. But now suddenly all of that has changed. Now, first and foremost, telehealth in audiology is about safety and how can we mitigate the risks that these patients face when they have face-to-face contact. Audiology clinics, by their nature, are high risk for infection. Due to their proximity, it's usually small spaces, confined soundproof booths. The length of our appointments are also very long, so it increases the risk due to duration. And the test setup requires multiple pieces of equipment to be used on patients, which obviously increases the contact and the risk of infection. So that means changing times require changing practices. We cannot continue to provide services the same way as we've been used to. We need to think about how can we provide new point of care patient journeys that will reduce the things like the proximity that we are with our patients, the duration of our engagements, face-to-face engagements with patients, but also the amount of equipment interactions that patients may need. So anything to mitigate these risks are very important. So there's been an interesting survey conducted, a very responsive survey by the Hearing Review. The first one was in March, and they've followed this up with a follow-up one in April that's just been completed. And they've surveyed audiological practices and looked at things like, in this case, the hearing aid unit sales in the last week reported by audiologists, and also their predicted gross revenues for April and how they expect that would compare to previous weeks during the same period last year. And as you can see, the clear trend there is that the majority of audiologists in the US and Canada are reporting that there will be a more than 90% decrease in hearing aid unit sales in the last week and in the predicted gross revenues during April. So there's certainly, it's clear that COVID-19 is having a massive influence in audiological care. And this data is for the US and Canada, but we can extrapolate that for anywhere in the world. Audiological practices have been closed for the most part globally. So I think this can probably be generalized to the majority of audiological practices around the world. If we think about this question in the survey, what best describes your plans as an audiology practice for the month of May? Importantly here to note is that only 11% of practices reported that they think they will have full operating hours during the month of May. The vast majority of the others will either be closed or they will scale back their hours quite drastically. So in May, audiologists still expect this COVID-19 crisis to have a significant influence on the way in which they will be able to serve their patients and keep their practice doors open. The survey also engaged around teleaudiology as part of the strategy for dealing with the coronavirus, and they could check all that apply. And this is a comparison between the survey that was done in March, the lighter bars, and the survey that was conducted in April, the darker bars. And as you can see here, that audiologists said that yes, for new patients and first fits, 13 and 15% of them plan to use teleaudiology. Interestingly, for audiological evaluations in March, no one indicated that they'll use telehealth. In April, there was a slight increase to 3%, but still very few audiologists have the means or feel comfortable to actually offer audiological evaluations through telehealth. And then for the most part, they are planning to use telehealth for follow-ups and counseling, for hearing aid adjustments and fine-tuning. And then there's a small percentage, well, about a quarter of them that indicated that no, they will not use telehealth services because they don't think it would be applicable to their client base. And the last option there was no, because we aren't equipped to do telehealth. So in March, 34% of audiologists said, a third of them, that they weren't equipped to do telehealth. You can see how quickly the COVID-19 crisis changed that. A month later, only 19% of audiologists said they're not equipped to deliver these services. So certainly there's an interest in using telehealth. It's obviously driven by the need to find solutions to reach patients. The biggest gap, however, is in how can audiologists provide assessments to patients. So, and here I just want to kind of take a future view on what this COVID-19 crisis may look like for audiology over the coming months and years, perhaps. And this is an Economist article that came out last week, an opinion piece by Bill Gates that's very insightful. And it talks about the new reality that COVID-19 has brought about and the hopes that we as the world have that things will go back to normal. But Bill Gates makes this statement to say that many hope things will return to the way they were in December. But unfortunately, that won't happen. He goes further to say, I believe humanity will beat this pandemic, but only when most of the population is vaccinated globally, he's meaning. And then he goes on to say that my hope is that by the second half of 2021, facilities around the world will be manufacturing a vaccine. And then he goes on to say that if this happens, if we have a vaccine that's ready to be manufactured in the second half of next year, it will be a history-making achievement to have been able to identify a condition and develop a vaccine and manufacture it and start to roll it out in such a short period of time. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but the reality is we're living in a new era. COVID-19 is here to stay for the foreseeable future and will change the way in which the world works, including audiological care. So on that point, we published a recent article that's still ahead of print, myself and Jay Hall, with the title Making Audiology Work During COVID-19 and Beyond. And in this paper, we conclude towards the end to say that COVID-19 is a watershed moment for audiology, like for many other industries around the world, and that while the threat is real, it offers a unique opportunity for us as audiologists to redefine and innovate how we reach and serve our patients in a more responsive, efficient, and person-centered way. And that means we have to reconsider the way in which we provide audiological services. Traditionally, our services have been high-touch services. They've been based in clinics and in soundproof booths, which mean the infection rate for COVID-19 is high, high to medium. The contraindications for these assessment facilities are age. People over 60 years of age are at high risk. If they have comorbidities, it increases their risk. And it also means that if we are going to see patients in these settings, we need to adhere to very strict infection controls, including social distancing, hand hygiene, surface decontamination, and universal source control. But we can also start thinking around low-touch audiological services, where we have different settings that are not in traditional clinics or sound booths, but where it's counter-side or drive-through even types of services, where the risk is then reduced to a low or a medium degree of risk. There's of course things that still need to be considered, contraindications like comorbidity risk. In some cases, depending on how much of the assessment the patients are going to be responsible for, we may need to think about their digital proficiency. And infection controls are still very important, although it may be less invasive than in a high-touch setting. And then we may even go as far as considering no-touch audiological services that are home-based, where the infection risk becomes low or minimal. And here contraindications again may be things like digital proficiency. Is there a significant other with the patient or the client that can assist and help with the self-assessment? We also may want to think about the degree of the loss. Profound losses may not be the right kind of loss to serve in these low or no-touch services. And then, of course, a home-based setting also needs to think about things like privacy and confidentiality of the equipment being used. And in this case, infection controls will include surface decontamination of the equipment and decontamination of the earphones of the device being used. So if we think of COVID-19 and audiology in this way, it's really now about identifying, mitigating, and managing the risks that COVID-19 poses to the vast majority of the patients that we're serving. For existing patients, low and no-touch care can quite easily be adopted through telehealth services. Most of the hearing aid manufacturers have been very good at developing telehealth support for their hearing aids. Unfortunately, in most cases, it's been for the more premium devices, but there certainly are options there. The issue comes with new patients. How do we get new patients into our audiological care and to provide them with the services that they require? And here we need to start thinking about how can we triage patients and direct them to low and no touch care, or in the cases where it's necessary, send them to high touch care with the necessary precautions in terms of safety, decontamination, and keeping infection risk as low as possible. So it's really about balancing the risk versus the benefit in the patients we serve, but safety has to be paramount during this period of time. So that brings us to how can we think through new care pathways that may start with a no or low touch interaction that may be informed by whether these clients have sufficient digital proficiency, is there sufficient support at home, and then we can escalate it when it's necessary to higher touch services. When we, for example, suspect that there's an ear disease, or when we think that a real ear measurement is essential to actually improve the satisfaction of the fitting for our patients. So if we think through these two different models in audiological assessments, for conventional clinics that are high touch and these alternative care pathways that are more low or no touch, the primary purpose may be very different. So for high touch clinics, assessments are typically going to be for diagnostic purposes, possible medical treatment. There may be an ear disease of sorts. And for the alternative care pathways, it may mostly be for assessment towards hearing aid fittings. And if there's a risk of an ear disease, to refer these patients. And the reality is that the vast majority of the adult patients we see are actually patients who are only requiring assessments towards a hearing aid fitting and do not have an ear disease risk as indicated here. In terms of test settings, the conventional clinics are typically the sound-treated rooms, the booth, the confined spaces. Alternative care pathways may come in many different forms. It may be in a home, in an office environment, it may be counter-side assessments, it may even be a type of drive-through service. In terms of specific tests, if we look at pure tone audiometry, for conventional clinics, high-touch environments, we need air and bone conduction assessments. We need a sound-treated environment so that we can test down to minimum levels of -10 dB, very controlled conditions where we can test down to 125 Hertz and up to 8,000 Hertz and even extended high frequencies if necessary. But for our alternative care pathways, if we're doing these assessments for hearing aid assessments and towards hearing aid fittings, we may just need air conduction audiometry. Our minimum test intensities may only be 20 or 25 decibels, and we may not need to test below 500 Hertz to get a good hearing aid fitting from. Other test procedures, speech audiometry in a conventional clinic, it's essential. In low and no touch settings, we could use alternative assessments like self-test options that include a digital noise test that's been widely validated. Tympanometry and OAE are essential in conventional clinics, but they are unlikely in low and no touch settings and probably not necessary. Otoscopy is essential in a conventional clinic. It may be optional in a low or no touch setting. In terms of ear disease assessments, in a conventional high-touch clinic, we use a test battery to cross-check and ascertain if there is an ear disease or a conductive pathology. We look at the air-bone gap. We consider it alongside the case history as well. In alternative low or no-touch settings, we can also rely on test findings, but a different set of test findings. There are also tools available like the Consumer Ear Disease Risk Assessment that is a well-validated survey that can be completed by consumers or clients and that will give them a risk score of whether they should actually see a medical provider for an ear disease risk. And there's also an FDA waiver option in the US for patients who are looking for a hearing aid but may not be able to get a high touch assessment. In terms of operation, conventional clinics, audiologists are primarily responsible. In these alternative care pathways, audiologists may be remotely involved, but it may actually be a self-test or facilitated by an assistant. So from this Hearing Journal article, in terms of the assessments, we've also made the statement that recent developments provide alternatives to conventional audiological assessments, such as bone conduction audiometry and tympanometry, to identify the risk of ear disease. If a risk is detected for a conductive hearing loss or an ear disease, this small group of subgroup of patients can then be directed to high-touch audiology services. And the current data suggests that in adults, this small subgroup of patients with conductive hearing loss or ear disease vary anywhere from between 2 and 5%. So it is a very small group. The vast majority of our patients, therefore, can probably be served through low and no touch services. I'm just also drawing your attention to this paper that's just gone live today. It's an early online Audiology Today journal paper by a number of different authors, including Jay Hall and myself, in which the same deduction is made. It's about teleaudiology in this pandemic era. And the statement says that with some creativity, audiologists can conduct or coordinate each step of the hearing assessment process without any direct patient contact. That is, with patients collecting their own audiological data either independently with the self-test system or with the assistance of a family member. So this is the direction that audiological assessments are taking during this COVID-19 era. So let me kind of run you through a quick low touch model that we can hypothesize and what it could look like. You can see here that we have a patient that contacts an audiologist. The audiologist may do a proficiency screen, a digital proficiency screen. There are some easy to do tools that you can easily employ here. The audiologist can do a teleconsultation ahead of time. There are very useful IDA telecare tools that can help patients prepare for this appointment. And then you may schedule, for example, a counter side or a drive-through assessment where the patient comes in. It's a low-touch environment. It doesn't happen in a typical sound-treated room. The patient may be at a counter side utilizing a tablet-based system where they run through a self-assessment supported by an assistant or an audiologist who's in the room. But the majority of this happens as a self-guided test, and the audiologist is there for support. The feedback can be provided over the counter, initial feedback at least, but then a remote teleconsultation can be scheduled with the audiologist to discuss the results in more details, answer any questions, and also make treatment recommendations, which may include a hearing aid, if indicated. And if a patient wants to go ahead with a hearing aid trial, the audiologist can select, pre-program, and provide the hearing aid at the counter side or the drive-through session on a second fit and go consult, where literally the patient comes in, there's a brief interaction, and the hearing aid is provided. And then all the follow-up support, the troubleshooting, remote fine-tuning, and counseling happens in a telehealth setup. That brings me to a no-touch setup that can also be envisaged, where the patient also contacts the audiologist remotely. They have a first consultation. If the digital proficiency screen shows that it's possible, there is support also at home. A self-test kit can be shipped to the patient. With an easy user interface, the patient can set it up, connect it to the internet. It runs the patient through a series of tests, and the audiologist could be on standby to provide remote tele support and review the results. Once the test is completed, the results obviously synchronizes back to the audiologist for review and asynchronous telehealth feedback. The test kit can be collected and then disinfected and returned to the audiological practice. And then the audiologist can have a teleconsultation, make the necessary recommendations based on the findings, answer any questions, and if a hearing aid is indicated, it could be pre-programmed and sent to the patient. The patient could then do a guided fitting with the audiologist on remote support, and if there's any troubleshooting necessary, it could also be a hybrid system where the patient comes into a counter-side assessment, the audiologist assists them there, but ultimately the follow-up and tele-support, fine-tuning and troubleshooting and counseling happens in a remote telehealth environment. So these are just two examples of how a no-touch or a low-touch model or a hybrid of these two can actually operate to reduce the risk during the COVID-19 time. I am going to move on now to this assessment component in a no-touch, but also in a low-touch setting, because as we've seen with the hearing review survey, this is the main area where audiologists are uncertain, where they don't know what kind of devices, tests can be used to actually bridge this gap where we want to provide services to new patients. So that brings me to the second part of the presentation, the digital solutions for alternative care. And here I'm going to focus on the new hearX self-test kit that enables this home-based no-touch testing or a low-touch testing, which may be counter-side or a curbside test assessment. So the hearX self-test kit constitutes a customizable test battery that includes pure tone audiometry, speech and noise testing, HEARTEST assessment, digital AI otoscopy as an optional feature, And then all of this encapsulated in an integrated cloud-based data management service that allows for remote asynchronous telehealth, but also for reporting and data management on the audiologist side. So let's look at the building blocks of the solution very briefly. So the first is the digital audiometry, which is the HEARTEST application developed by hearX. This is automated audiometry that runs on a tablet using calibrated headphones with an easy user interface that can be self-guided as a self-test. The technology has been validated in numerous peer-reviewed papers. I've just included some examples down here. And just recently also the World Health Organization survey handbook for ear and hearing population-based surveys has been released. And HEARTEST also features in this handbook as the recommended digital audiometry solution that can be used for these kinds of surveys. It's also FDA and CE registered as a type 4 audiometer. Importantly, if you're doing these assessments in people's homes or in alternative settings, quality control metrics are essential. So the audiometer does real-time tracking of the noise in the environment before the test, but also during the test. We also track false positive rates, the response rates of the patient as a quality metric that we compare to a large database to ensure that they're responding within the normal ranges. And then we also do a test-retest reliability check to ensure that the testing is actually reliable. We also, the test includes an intelligent threshold seeking method that's informed by a large database of 1.3 million audiograms that uses the age, but also the adjacent frequencies that's been tested to optimize the test sequence. And this leads to 80% time saving in the test threshold determination, which means test time is typically between 3 and 6 minutes for an audiogram from 500 to 8,000 hertz for the left and the right ear. So it's a rapid test that can be conducted at home by the patients themselves or assisted by a significant other. Here's just a quick rundown of the user interface. So the HEARTEST is the first test. The patient is instructed how long it will take. They fit the hearing or the headphones on their own ears. We do a quick check to make sure that they've actually got the right ear on the right ear and the left ear transducer on the left ear, and then they're ready to start the test. They can do a noise check for the environment where it'll tell them whether it's sufficiently quiet. There's test instructions, there's a practice conditioning phase, and then the actual test starts with a single response button on the tablet screen. And they're just instructed to listen to the tone and press the button when they hear it. After the test is completed, there's a easy consumer or client-centered feedback page that summarizes the audiogram for them in a simple bar that compares their hearing to normal hearing and categorizes it in terms of a moderate loss, for example, in this middle screen. But for the audiologist or for the informed patient, they can actually look at their audiogram as well on the next tab. And then there's also a tab that measures the reliability of the testing that reports on the noise levels, the mean response times, the standard deviations, the false response counts, and the test-retest reliability. And all of this information is important for the audiologist to review on the cloud-based data management service to ensure that it's actually providing reliable results that can be used to inform treatment. So that brings us to the second test in the HEARTEST self-test kit. And this is a speech test that forms part of the HearSpeech application. For our purposes, with the self-test kit, we run a simple digits in noise test paradigm to determine a speech recognition threshold. We do this by using a binaural test paradigm where we determine their ability to hear randomly presented digits in background noise. This test procedure has been widely validated in a number of peer-reviewed journals over the past few years. In fact, it's been so well validated that the World Health Organization has also now incorporated this exact same test into their HEARWHO app that was launched last year with the World Hearing Day. And this same test paradigm is included in the self-test kit. Other groups that are using the same test material is 23andMe. They've actually tested more than 250,000 people already in the US with this exact same test. In South Africa, it serves as the national hearing test of South Africa. And then recently in France, it was also launched as the national hearing test in France. So the test gives you a speech recognition threshold, a decibel signal to noise ratio, and it informs, of course, the audiologist in terms of the expectations that the patient should have in terms of a hearing aid fitting. It also informs the counseling as a tool that really reflects real life difficulties with hearing speech in background noise. There's also an optional feature to include antiphasic digits in noise testing, a second test. And if that's conducted, you can also actually get the masking level difference that provides additional information for counseling. The test time is around 3 minutes to conduct this hear speech test. This is just what the user flow looks like. The instructions are provided. There's a conditioning phase, and then the patient hears the digits presented, and they just punch them into a keypad. This runs for 23 steps, and then there's a final test result that's provided to the patient, again in a simple format that just tells them whether it's reduced or it's normal, their ability to hear speech in background noise. The audiologist on the cloud-based back-end side gets an actual speech recognition threshold in decibel signal to noise ratio. And in actual fact, it's a diagnostic value. It's not a screening value because it runs off a digital platform, and that can be used as a valuable indicator for audiologists as they consider the treatment and the management and counseling for this patient. So that brings us to the third assessment in the self-test environment, and that's called HEARRisk. And this is a measure that detects the risk of ear disease in these patients. We mentioned the importance of, because we're using low touch and no touch environments, and we typically aren't able to do things like bone conduction testing or tympanometry, we want to have a reliable way to detect the risk that patients may have an ear disease or a conductive hearing loss, so that we can escalate that referral to a high touch setting. So we use a number of ways to estimate the risk or determine the risk. The first is a conductive loss algorithm. That's actually a proprietary algorithm that we've developed. We use the pure tone audiometry and the speech and noise testing that's been done before the hearRisk app. And we use age in a logistic regression that then differentiates whether the patient has a sensory neural hearing loss or a conductive hearing loss, with an accuracy of 94%. Here is some data from a manuscript that's currently under final preparation by a number of co-authors, as you can see down there. And this actually shows the speech recognition threshold on your left-hand side, and the poor ear 500 Hz pure tone audiometry threshold. And you can see this very clear differentiation between conductive hearing losses and sensory neural hearing losses, which allows us to really accurately predict and determine if someone has a conductive hearing loss using these metrics. On the right-hand side, you can see an ROC curve that comes to a sensitivity to identify conductive hearing loss of around 97% and a specificity of 93.4%. So a very accurate model to predict conductive hearing loss risk. We also do an asymmetric hearing loss screen. So based on the pure tone audiometry, we determine whether there's an asymmetric loss that warrants a referral for ear disease. And we include some FDA red flag questions for possible ear disease. And if any of those are positive, we flag that as a referral for a high touch audiology service to confirm if there is actually an ear disease or a conductive hearing loss risk. The test time for this procedure is typically 1 minute. It also includes, however, an optional feature where you can switch on the consumer ear disease risk assessment that was developed in Northwestern University. If you want to include this questionnaire, it adds an additional 5 minutes to the hearRisk protocol. Here's just typically what the user interface would look like. From the ear speech, it moves to hearRisk. It does the risk assessment. The patient literally just puts in their birth date and then determines the conductive hearing loss risk. And then the CEDRIS questionnaire is an optional feature that can also be activated. That brings us to the last feature in the assessment, which is the digital AI otoscopy. It's an optional that can be included in the self-test kit. The hearScope is a pen-like otoscope that actually plugs into the tablet or the mobile phone. It's an easy-to-use digital otoscope that is operated from the digital device. It includes features like auto crop and auto zoom, making it really easy to operate. And we see this as a tool that could be used when there's a significant other there, or a person who has good dexterity. At the least, we can get an image of the outer part of the ear canal, so we can get an indication of whether there's a wax obstruction that we need to take note of. But we can also get an image of the ear canal and the tympanic membrane. The otoscope has been developed in such a way that the specula are very short, so there's no risk of actually, causing damage in the ear canal or to the tympanic membrane. Importantly, the hearScope also includes an AI, artificial intelligence image classification tool, which does make it a really great remote care tool. This AI classification tool was released about a month ago, and it has a classification accuracy of these images for 4 categories of 94% accuracy. So it can identify normal, wax obstruction, perforation, and abnormal categories where ear disease is expected. And a typical test time may be anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. Just a quick note on the AI diagnosis accuracy. This has also been published in a number of publications. Traditional otoscopy by a general practitioner or a pediatrician is about around 64 to 80% if you look at the literature. In terms of our first AI decision tree, our accuracy was around 81%. Our second iteration was 86%, and now the version that's in beta released for current users has a 94% accuracy as a deep neural network. Maybe I can just show you a quick video of how this feature works. Here's a normal ear canal. The hearScope is inserted into the ear. It focuses on the eardrum. A picture is taken, and then the AI is reported as normal with a 92% confidence interval or confidence level. If we look at the next video, this is of a wax obstruction. You can see an image is taken. It runs the AI in the background on a server, and it says a wax obstruction with 100% confidence level. The user interface, here's just a little overview. There's clear instructions in the beginning on how to set it up, how to position it, how to focus, and then an image can be taken. It gets uploaded as well to the cloud-based service so that the audiologist can interpret, and there's the AI diagnosis on the actual device. So that brings us to the final part of this, the self-test kit, which is the online test and patient management tool called mHealth Studio. So this is where the audiologist can log in on a web-based platform to actually see the test results in real time. It also allows for HIPAA-compliant data management, viewing of the client data, and for asynchronous telehealth and support to the patient on site. And then of course it allows for report generation in the practice for the audiologist. So just some notes on the practical use. Here's what the case looks like with the tablet and the headphones. Data connectivity can either be through Wi-Fi or through a data SIM inside the device. In the US, there is only a Wi-Fi option on this tablet. In terms of cleaning and disinfectant, a 70% isopropyl alcohol can be used on both the tablet and on the earphones, which is sufficient and recommended for COVID-19 disinfectant and decontamination. So that can be used on this device before and after a client has actually operated it. So to conclude with, COVID-19 is likely to continue to have a pervasive influence in the world, but also in audiology into 2021 and probably beyond that. It is a threat to the viability of our traditional audiological services at present, but also probably for the next couple of months and even years as the world is changing around this pandemic. But on the positive note, it certainly creates an impetus to rapidly deploy and scale innovative telehealth approaches like the one I've just shared with you. And these changes will be necessary for the sake of our patients, their safety, but also for the continuation of our audiology practices. Ultimately, it also has the potential to really change the way in which audiology will be provided in the future. We are living on the brink of the fourth industrial revolution. And in some way, this COVID-19 crisis is also bringing about our own little revolution in the way audiological care is being provided. So I trust that you will all find this helpful and useful as you face the challenges of COVID-19 in your practices and your audiological care. At this point, I'm going to end off my portion of the presentation and hand back over to Riani.
Great, thank you so much, Devet, and for sharing our latest product offering with the audience. Just for everyone, there's a handout in the handout section. We are offering a discount for anyone that wants to order the solution. If there are any other questions that we haven't answered in the question section, we will definitely send an email addressing all of those. The webinar is recorded, so we will be putting it up on the website soon for everybody to also maybe share that. If there are any other questions that you come to think of afterwards, more than welcome to send an email to us at info@hearxgroup.com. That is on the screen at the moment. And once again, just feel free to visit our website. And it is great to have been able to share this with you, and have a good day further. And please keep safe within these difficult times. And again, Devet, thank you so much for your time.